Iran has a lot of capability if it chose to employ it. If it does, it's going to lose in the end, but there will be enormous damage throughout the region, very likely. Well, I suspect that there will be a range of options. It will go everything up to and including targets inside Iran, particularly the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force, which is the element from Iran that interfaces with and supports the Shia militia that apparently carried out this terrible attack. But more likely will be to try to thread the needle a bit farther, noting that that has not really worked so far, but to go after an Iranian element inside Syria, perhaps where they are stockpiling or training or manufacturing or carrying out some of the activities that enable these Shia militia to carry out these attacks. Of course, there have been attacks directly on the militia in the past in both Syria and Iraq. The attacks nonetheless have continued until now, of course. These various bases have been able to defend themselves against these attacks. And apparently in this case, there was a failure to respond to this drone because there was a U.S. drone in the area at roughly the same time. But this absolutely requires a response. The question is, how can you send a message that this needs to cease without provoking something greater? And of course, that's the concern. Now, I don't think Iran really wants to provoke the United States. I think they may be actually taking some deep breaths right now as well. Keep in mind that if they, for example, interfered with freedom of navigation in the Gulf, which would be the action that would have the most profound consequences for the global economy, they would also preclude their own ability to export roughly 1.8 million barrels of crude per day to various markets in the Asia Pacific region in particular. They don't want to lose that revenue. Their economy is not in good shape as it is, but they are happy to continue to fight to the last Houthi or the last Lebanese Hezbollah fighter or Hamas terrorists or obviously these Shia militia elements that carried out this attack. Sure, it's very much on people's minds, but they don't know where it is. Of course, you never know until the action is actually taken. But Iran has a lot of capability if it chose to employ it. If it does, it's going to lose in the end, but there will be enormous damage throughout the region, very likely. Again, U.S. capabilities in the region are very, very considerable. Iran knows this. When they've seen these used in the past, such as when we defeated the Iranian-supported Shia militia during the Battle of Basra and Sadr City and so forth in March and April of 2008, they understand what it is that U.S. forces and some of our allies in that region can do. And I don't think, again, they want to provoke that. But you don't know what could happen. There are, again, this is akin to rolling the iron dice, as Bismarck used to describe the decision to go to war. This is more to increase what it is that we've been doing. But, you see the same challenge in responding to the Houthis, who are, of course, Iranian supported and largely using Iranian provided missiles and drones and so forth as they disrupt freedom of navigation in the Red Sea. And we're going at that, I think, in a thoughtful manner, an effective manner, noting that we're not going to be able to end it all in any one or two strikes, but gradually, painstakingly degrading the capabilities that they have, their radar systems, the command and control systems, the storage locations, the launch locations, and so forth, but without, again, provoking something bigger. And keep in mind, it's always more complex than people realize. When it comes to the Houthis, for example, the Saudis do not want to see the ceasefire that they crafted with the Houthis broken because they were on the receiving end of the Houthi drones and missiles in the past. So there are second and third and fourth order effects potential in every one of these scenarios. And that's what the administration is without question grappling with right now. Well, again, I'm not sure how you define a pre-war world, what that really means. I mean, there are two wars ongoing in which we're not directly engaged, where we're supporting partners on the ground, obviously Russia defending against the brutal and unprovoked invasion by Russia, and then Israel supporting it in its effort to destroy the terrorist organization that visited 10/7 on the Israeli people. Yes, then there are others in the region where, again, Iranian-supported militias are carrying out various activities, in some cases against American and UK forces. But I don't know that we're on the threshold of something larger. In fact, what decision makers are trying to do is avoid something larger happening because of the potential consequences for the global economy. And that's particularly acute in the United States, given that we're in an election year.
Yeah.
Gasoline prices can go up and all these other concerns, which are all, I think, very legitimate. It's always much easier to be on the outside or even to be on Capitol Hill and calling for, a much stronger or more robust or whatever response. Having been in the actual situation room and sat at the table, the weight of responsibility is a good bit. Well, it's an interesting question because there is record here. The Iranians shot down a several $100 million American drone over the Strait of Hormuz. President Trump ordered a strike against Iran. It would have been the first strike, overt strike, certainly airstrike, carried out since, I think, the aborted attempt to rescue the American hostages in Tehran back in 1979. And then at the last minute, called it off. And then the Iranians hit the Abqaiq oil facility in Saudi Arabia with drones and missiles, took 5% of the world's crude oil supply off the market for a period of time, a very substantial action, and we did not do anything. But then one American was killed in Iraq by Iranian-supported forces, as I recall, and the decision was taken to kill Qasem Soleimani, the longtime 21-year head of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards Corps Quds Force, my nemesis for well over a decade, I should note, and a very, very significant actor. He was literally the equivalent of for Iran, of the CIA director, the Joint Special Operations Command commander, and the Assistant Secretary of State for the Middle East, all in one person. And so you go from doing nothing to something very substantial, very huge, really. I certainly shed no tears for Qasem Soleimani. You can question whether it might have been on Syrian soil rather than Iraqi soil, given the fragility of the U.S.-Iraq relationship. And there was also a very significant Iraqi Shia militia leader who fled Iraq, actually, in the early days of the surge, and certainly didn't come back until the U.S. forces were gone, who was taken in that one as well. No, look, so again, the record is not crystal clear. What that points to is a little bit difficult to say. Keep in mind that was the president who also pulled us out of Syria completely on 24 hours notice and then put us back in a few days later. So there is a degree of unpredictability there that sometimes can work to your favor, but not all times. Well, first of all, let me just note I am totally non-political in the U.S. I
understand that.
I don't even register to vote, but your audience should understand that. So there's no party affiliation. I don't support nor endorse candidates. I advise members of either party, including, I'm quite certain, some of those who have made those statements. And with all due respect, we're in a political season, and I think that you get that kind of statement. If you look at the record, we experienced many of the same kinds of challenges back then. And I would submit that, again, in some cases, there's been enormous continuity from the previous administration to the current one. If you look at the Indo-Pacific, in some other areas, for example, support for NATO and so forth, it's a good bit different. And I would actually note that I do believe that we should not have left Afghanistan, noting it was the previous administration that made the agreement that was followed through on by this administration mistakenly, I believe. And I do believe that the decision to withdraw and the conduct of the withdrawal very likely was one of the factors that did lead Putin to invade Ukraine, underestimating what turned out to be quite a substantial U.S. response, and a response that I hope can continue to be very robust if the members of Congress on the Hill perhaps some of those who are obstacles right now to a bill that would provide very substantial additional assistance for Ukraine, but also for Israel, also for Taiwan, together with a border package, if all that could come together. So again, this is much more complex than, frankly, those who comment on this from a particularly political perspective during an election year will publicly acknowledge, even though they will certainly privately. I share those concerns. I should also acknowledge that probably no general ever felt that he had enough of anything. I was privileged to command 2 wars. I think the only person perhaps alive who has done that, at least in recent history. And I never felt like I had enough troops, enough bandwidth was always key, enough drones. We were always allocating shortages, but it's the relative degree of risk is really what we're talking about here. And I do think that we are taking more risk than we should. That doesn't mean that spending $850 billion in the US on defense is not an extraordinary amount of money. The question is, are we spending it as effectively as we can? And there, I don't think that we are. I think there are enormous vested interests in what Senator McCain used to term the military-industrial congressional complex that end up with a fair amount of waste. We have more infrastructure than we need, more bases than we need. We have more legacy systems than we need, and that precludes us from making the kind of expedited, accelerated transformation of our forces from what might be termed simplistically a small number of large platforms, incredibly capable, incredibly expensive, and increasingly vulnerable, to a massive number of much smaller platforms, unmanned in all domains, maritime, ground, air, space, cyberspace, and undersea as well, that increasingly will not even be remotely piloted, but will be algorithmically piloted, where the human in the loop becomes the human on the loop, the human who designs the software, gives the directions, codes it all, and then allows it to perform its tasks. There's a bit ethically challenging aspect.
AI weaponry you're talking about. AI weaponry you're talking about.
Well, it's AI-enabled weaponry and AI-enabled systems, because, again, many of these will be intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance as well. But that's where we need to be going. We need to be going there faster. And certainly we should have also, in the meantime, increased levels of munitions. Europe is struggling to be able to produce 1 million rounds of 155 millimeter howitzer ammunition a year to help Ukraine. U.S. is ramping up dramatically. So yes, I share those concerns very much. And I think that leaders do need to take that very seriously, because I believe that we face a greater number of challenges and a more complex array of challenges than at any time since the end of World War II.